This past week, Vincent and I were working with some of our new fourth grade altar servers in training them. And we were talking with them about sometimes, not everything is as it appears, that appearances don't always reveal what is the full truth, everything that's actually happening there. And we were talking about the sanctuary. And so by all appearances, right, the sanctuary is this elevated plane. It's got some carpet and wood. It has this really nice marble table, some candles, a cross, the occasional flower in front of it. But it's not always as it appears. In fact, during Mass, it is never as it just simply appears, as experience tells us. Because in fact, during Mass, there is more than just wood, an elevated plane, a table, and candles and a cross. It is elevated because literally all of the inhabitants of heaven come down and meet us here. We join in the worship of the angels and the saints, and they are here with us. And even better, we transcend our time and place in the Mass, that we are elevated beyond this place, joining with the eternal worship of the angels and the saints of our victorious Lamb, Jesus Christ, who most incredibly is present here during the Mass. And so sometimes, we were talking with the service, that sometimes you have to actually shut your eyes and imagine what is really taking place. Because if we're just looking, it doesn't look to be that heaven and earth are meeting right here in front of us. Sometimes we have to shut our eyes because experience doesn't reveal the fullness of what's really taking place. And our Lord uses parables in much the same way. Our Lord, in today's parable, gives us a parable about stewardship. And he uses a parable because experience doesn't reveal to us the fullness of truth when it comes to stewardship. Right? Experience tells me that what I have is mine. My money is my money. My name is on the check stub. I'm the one that cashes the check. I'm the only one that can access my funds. I worked for that money. I get to decide how it is used. And of course, I had great parents who did their best to raise me to be a good, responsible, and generous person. And so I'm the one that gets to decide how I budget and spend that money, right? So we probably all go through a similar budgeting process and process of spending money. First, we do the good and responsible thing of making sure that all of our debts are being paid, that if we owe any money, we're paying that down. Hopefully saving a little money back for an emergency fund, should that come someday, or the need for an emergency fund. Of course, you also want to budget and at least 10% to be given to the church, to this parish, to other worthy causes, budgeting in generosity. And of course, listening, keeping your ears to the grindstone. I know we all do that if there's any family or friends or a parishioner or someone we know that's in particular need. And then whatever's left over, right, we pocket. We get to make the decision of what we're going to do with that money. We pocket it or save up for a trip or save up for something that we're going to buy ourselves, invest it, whatever it might be. Experience tells us, though, that we get to decide, right, that it's my money, it's my name on that check, it's my checking account, or if you have a spouse, it's our money. Experience tells us that we are the masters of our money. We are the ones that decide how goodness and good use of our money is defined, how responsible use of our money is defined, how generous use of our money is defined. We're the master. Experience tells us that we're the masters of our money. And this is why it's timely that our Lord gives us this parable. Because, again, the use of parable is trying to explain to us something that experience doesn't fully reveal. That there's a deeper truth to this. Our lived experience doesn't reflect the full truth. Certainly, experience tells us that, and is right. We have things and money in our possession. But this parable is trying to express to us that nothing that we have in our possession belongs to us. Not one single cent, not one single thing belongs to us. In many ways, defying our experience. Nothing that we have belongs to us. Experience tells us that we are the masters, but in fact, we are simple and humble stewards of the things that we possess. And as we know, a steward is a caretaker. A steward is a caretaker of someone else's possessions, of someone else's money, of someone else's things, and they oversee those possessions, that money, so that they might flourish in service of a master. In service of a master. And I think for most of us, right, the mindset of being a steward is not that hard to live. Most of us live it, especially in the short term. I'm sure many of us have been asked to do a favor for a friend or a family, that we watch over someone's house while they're gone, or babysit their pets, that we watch over these things. And in the short term, it's really easy to understand what a steward is, right? These things, this house, this pet is not mine. I'm just simply here to take care of it and make sure nothing goes wrong. But the longer we wear that hat of being a steward, the more easily it becomes to begin to buy in to only what experience tells us. Just like it was for the dishonest steward in today's gospel. Right? We can imagine that the steward was actually probably started out as a good steward. No master is going to hire someone that is outright a bad person, not qualified for the job. They probably started out a good, responsible, and probably even generous steward of this master's possessions. But over time, experience began to speak to the steward. And the steward began to buy in. Over time, after years, he began to buy into the fact that really the buck does stop with him. That he's the one, after years, that really gets to decide what is a good and best use for that money. After decades, he's the one that gets to decide what is a responsible use and spending of that money. After years of not being held accountable by the generous master who employed him, he began to think that he himself was the master. He had become the master and bought into the lie that experience told him. And of course, the master finally calls him in and demands an accounting of this dishonest steward's stewardship, and then expels him from his service. Expels him from his service. And I can't imagine, right, that there's no one in our parishes that's absolutely failing at stewardship. Certainly not. After all, we're good, we're responsible, and I think absolutely for the most part, we're generous. But that's exactly where the dishonest steward started. His starting point was that of goodness. His starting point was that of being responsible. His starting point was probably even that of generosity. The dishonest steward starts with being generous, responsible, and good. Guys, the minute we start there, we will inevitably begin at some point to buy into what experience alone tells us. That what we have is mine. That what I have, I am the master of. that I get to decide and exercise my power of deciding what is a good way to spend, what is a responsible way to use, what is a generous way to give. And once we buy into that lie, we are no longer serving the generous master. The generous master who gives us everything of his to oversee and use, but according to his service and his will. Where does a faithful steward start? A faithful steward does not start with goodness. A faithful steward does not start with being responsible. A faithful steward does not start with generosity. A faithful service starts well before that. A faithful steward starts well before that. Every day, the faithful steward, us, who are in service of our generous master, Jesus Christ, we start here first by acknowledging every day that every single thing that I have does not belong to me. It belongs to God. Everything, without exception, belongs to God. And it is immediately followed with this simple but crucial question. How does our generous master, how does Jesus Christ want us, you and I, to use those things he has given us as stewards in service of him? How does he want us to use those things he has given us in service of only him, our good master? That is where a faithful steward begins. And if that is our beginning, guys, surely we will end each and every day not as a dishonest steward, but as the faithful steward.